By the way, I'm Randy Credical, live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City. Free speech radio, folks. But now we'll be talking about free speech radio later on. We got to free Scotland now from the grip of the iron hand. Craig Murray, welcome to the show. And would you, before you introduce your associates here, Craig is my guest co-host today, so he's going to be here throughout the entire 2 hours. Craig Murray is here for other reasons, not to do this show, but just the logical song, the Supertramp, the leader of that band, died, and I know that was something that that touched your heart.
That song's by Davies and Hodgson, and Davies, he died a fortnight ago. Yeah, no, always been one of my favourite bands. And of course, that's something that happens to us as we get older, Randy. The people of our generation or slightly older that we've admired start to disappear away from us. And
it seems to be going around.
Yeah.
Seems to be going around. I've had I can't wait for this year to be over. Maybe the deaths will stop. I would not stop for death, so death kindly stopped for me. That was some Scottish writer, right? Who was it?
No, that one I don't know. That one I don't know.
Now, what's his name? Bertrand Russell.
It's amazing how often Bertrand Russell's come up lately. We've had the big mass arrests going on in London of Palestine Action supporters. And I think 2 weeks ago they arrested something like 700 people in one day for supporting Palestine Action. No, in London.
Okay, right.
Down in Trafalgar Square. And it turned out that was the second largest day of mass arrests in British history, the largest day having been a Bertrand Russell demonstration in the 1960s against nuclear weapons when they arrested over 1,000 people. And we know someone, our friend Hugh Kerr, who's been a guest on your programme. Hugh Kerr is the only person to have been arrested on both demonstrations, to have been arrested in the 1960s and again in 2025, on both the first and second highest arrest days in British history.
Wow.
So Hugh's doing
Ours
well.
will be tomorrow.
Ours will be
tomorrow.
I'm going back to Scotland in 2 days' time.
No, you won't. And you will not get out of here in 2 days' time.
Well, not only have I been campaigning for the independence of Scotland and for the liberation of some other colonies at the United Nations, I've also yesterday lodged a court action, which is now taking place in Scotland. The action is now live. It's been approved by the court against the British government for the prescription of Palestine Action. So I think between those two, I'm definitely going to get arrested.
You cannot say you support Palestine Action even on this show, right? You can't. That's a violation of the law.
I absolutely do not support Palestine Action because that would be terribly illegal. I used to support them very strongly. I was a major Palestine Action supporter, but then it became illegal, and overnight I stopped.
All right.
Because I'm well known never to do anything illegal at all.
All right, but you got a lawsuit going on in London, in Scotland, because there were people arrested there under this broad, I guess, United Kingdom law.
Yeah, we've started a specific lawsuit in Scotland, which we've literally started 2 days ago, to say that it's against Scots law in particular, because under Scots law, there's a maximum in Scots law that law cannot be absurd, and it's absurd to say that a non-violent domestic protest organisation is a terrorist organisation. That's plainly absurd. And also it's against the European Convention on Human Rights, bans freedom of speech and all of those things. But where there was already an action underway in the courts of England and Wales, but Scotland has its own legal jurisdiction and a much more people-based legal system and legal tradition. So we're quite hopeful of defeating this in the Scottish courts, and we could well end up in a situation where Palestine Action is a terrorist organisation in England, but it's a free and open organisation in Scotland. That will bring in all kinds of constitutional questions. The Westminster Parliament, which is in fact the English Parliament, but which governs the whole UK, they have brought in legislation which covers Scotland as well. But what we are saying is under the principles of Scots law, that legislation can't hold and is
right. But it illegal. Supersedes it, though, right? It does supersede federal law.
The situation's different in that it's a different kind of union, the United Kingdom. And when the Act of Union was adopted, fundamental principles of Scots law embodied in some of our founding constitutional documents, like the Claim of Right, were specifically stated to continue. So in legal terms, the UK government can't pass legislation which contravenes Scots law, fundamental Scots law. That can be struck down by the courts, and that's what we're attempting to prove.
Now, what's the movement? I know that you are at the vanguard, the three of you, of the movement, and it's pretty big. The support for home rule, or whatever you call it, just to break off from England and their local empire, to break away. But where is it right now? National opinion polls in Scotland for separation.
Yeah, well, I should say we have, and we'll be hearing in a minute.
Yes,
Tom, I have with me.
We're going to play this song about Stirling Bridge first, all right?
Very good. I have with me Professor Alf Baird and Linda Baird from.
Oh, they're both. Where are you going,
Scotland.
Linda? She's going to go get her hat.
Well, very sensible. It's sunny in here. We're in sunny Brooklyn,
right?
And we work with a movement called Liberation Scotland, which is the more radical end of the Scottish independence movement, if you like. But opinion polls in Scotland are now firmly in favour of independence. It's polled obsessively by the polling organisations. And there hasn't been an opinion poll in more than a year which hasn't shown a majority for Scottish independence. There are now stable majorities for Scottish independence.
Right.
And the key factor is that among people aged under the age of 30, independence support runs at about 80%. Among young people, it's absolutely taken as granted that this is something they want to do and which will come. And really the only demographic in which there's a majority against independence is the over 55s. And the good news is, as we were discussing earlier, people over 55 tend to die out.
That's tantamount to what's happening here, by the way. Tantamount to what's happening here. We're under 30. Thank God there are people under 30. Under 30 are the most, on Republican and Democrat Party affiliation, support Palestine over Israel. So I guess I had no hope for the youth, but now I do. I don't have any hope for the people my age. All right.
And to be fair, that is a result of their mobile phones. That's
Maybe
because
so.
They're seeing from Gaza what the mainstream media is not telling them. They're getting it direct on their mobile phone, on streaming apps and things, which, of course, is why Larry Ellison has bought TikTok to try to stop that happening.
I'm definitely getting off it. I was never on it. But there's got to be, someone's got to come up with something new. Can we play, and we'll move into the discussion about Scottish independence, the movement. The battle of Stirling Bridge. Alf, what was the Battle of Stirling Bridge?
I'm not a historian, Randy.
But I played that for you the last time you were on.
I know. I think we won that one. My main interest now is decolonisation. So I've been studying decolonisation the last 10 years. After a career in academia studying transportation, global trade, business.
Right. So you consider Scotland a colony?
Yes, absolutely. And this is why we've been at the United Nations this week. We've been petitioning the United Nations. They have two committees related to decolonisation. Decolonisation means independence. So what we've done in the last 10 years is really, in Scotland, we've tried to figure out what does independence mean, and we've now discovered it's decolonisation. So what that means is, of course, you're colonised. All your trade's taken out cheap. All your trade coming in is given to you very expensive. You've got a degree of settler occupation. You've got external political control and propaganda. You've got cultural imperialism, linguistic imperialism. You've got all the markers of colonialism. So what we've been doing in Liberation Scotland, bear in mind also what you have is a transfer from a political campaign to a people campaign now in Scotland, where the people understand their oppression. And that's the title of my book, Dún Hodden. Dún Hodden in Scots means oppressed.
Right.
And that's where I've got the theoretical framework that explains this condition. It's also psychological, because you end up with a colonial mindset, which is a well-established theory. So people actually welcome their oppression in some cases. It's a bit like the Stockholm Syndrome. They're kidnapped, they're captured, all their stuff's taken, but they love the colonizer to some extent. So there is a colonial mindset here affecting it as well. So when we talk about people being pro or anti-independence, we have to consider also the colonial mindset that's gripping people. And that's what holds the colonizer in place. Right. So it's very much a cultural thing, and independence.
Do they know it? I mean, do people know that they're being colonized? Let me just, before you answer that, also answer this: what benefits does the UK or England get out of having that country as a colony, and what does the colony get out of
Yep. Well, we've quantified the benefits. If you look at the GDP of Scotland, it's less than half Ireland, Norway, much less than Denmark. Little countries that are close to Scotland, but we've got half the wealth or less. Why is that? Because we've got more assets than they have, Mecca. So what's happening is our resources are plundered, taken out. We have no control over corporation tax. Everything's offshore. All the land's owned outside. All the corporations have been privatised. All the utilities have been privatised. The ports, energy, airports, everything's owned out offshore. Scots own very little of Scotland.
Amazon's one of those. Amazon, Jeff Bezos isn't that their home base?
Yeah,
Scotland, and they pay no taxes there.
US private equity outfits own a lot of Scotland, and a lot of we've also got the oil and gas that's been stripped out. We've now got a renewables revolution, which will give us more than $100 billion a year, but we get no royalties. We get no royalties from that, so that's stripped out. We're also locked into a monopoly supply chain from England, so England supplies everything, practically, coming into Scotland. Our ports are obsolete. We're not developed our ports. Our trade is diminished. So all our trade is dominated by one country. We're made dependent. And this is where you're a dependency. Culturally, you're also dependent, and people crave dependency. They look for dependency. They want it. They need it. Culturally, they're told there's a superior culture, which is Anglo, whereas we have the Scottish culture, we have the Scots language, the Gaelic language, different culture, different language, but we're only taught one language in the school. We're taught, just like Kenyans or Indians were, elites are made to cooperate. And then you have colonialism's a cooperative venture. So native elites buy into the system. We have colonial schools that teach the elites. We have colonial universities where the elites graduate from. So the elites who are anglicised, they assimilate into the culture of the coloniser. So most of the Scots are outside that domain. That's why half the population in Scotland live in or close to poverty today. We don't. I
can't believe that. I really can't, because I look at it. This is a rich country. I mean, I visited Craig. For 5 days, I traveled there.
Oppression is obscured by assimilation.
And tourism as well. You get a lot of tourism.
Well, Scotland's a great destination, but the fact is we only get half our wealth. Half our wealth is stripped out. The other part is used by the country. Is parts of it are reasonably wealthy, reasonably well off, but we still have a large degree of poverty, a housing crisis. We have a health crisis, and also we have the highest levels of addiction, alcohol deaths, and highest levels of imprisonment in Europe.
Wow, it sounds like this country. Highest level.
That's why.
Why do they have such a high level of imprisonment?
We have an ethnic and cultural division of labour in Scotland. So we have a cultural division. So we have the elites are basically culturally assimilated into the English culture. They're basically English people, and therefore they're dealing with judging Scots as an inferior culture.
What's the population of Scotland?
It's 5.6 million.
Small.
We've had the biggest outmigration of Europe.
Norway, right?
We had 4 million people were pushed out of Scotland in the last couple of hundred years, either by transportations, clearances, indentured labour, or Empire Resettlement Acts where the British government were funding them to go out. We had 8 to 10 times more out-migration than England per capita.
Who wants to talk about the Scottish Enlightenment? Because looking at what came out of there was greater than what came out of the rest of
what we didn't have in the Enlightenment was the Enlightenment telling us about Scotland the nation and the need to protect its culture, its constitution, which was all about the common good, the people, the crown being the community of the realm, not the monarch, and the people with the ability to remove governments and monarchs if they behave badly. We had all that these rights enshrined in law in the 1600s.
Right.
And we still have that constitution as part of the treaty, the conditions of the treaty, but it's disrespected.
Tell me the history of that, the Union of Parliament?
Well, the Treaty of Union was, of course,
Treaty of Union. That was 1610 or something like
1707. Well,
Okay.
the Union of the Crowns was 100 years before. But what I would say is all treaties between in colonies are colonial treaties. The UK has hundreds of treaties with colonies, has had hundreds of treaties. And all that the Treaty of Union was simply another treaty. What we found in the legal advice recently that we've had is that England's Parliament continued at the point of the treaty. No new Parliament of the UK was created. England's Parliament continued, Scotland's Parliament was dissolved. England's embassies continued, Scotland's embassies dissolved. England's treaties continued, Scotland's treaties finished, ignored.
Wow.
So Scotland continued. Scotland did not continue. England continued as it was, but simply rebranded UK. So what you have now is England rebranded as UK, annexed Scotland. It was a takeover, not a merger. So it wasn't a partnership agreement. It was a very one-sided thing. And the aristocrats who signed the contract were all bribed and ran off to their English estates after they signed it because they were not welcome in Scotland. We had riots and then some wars of independence in the 1700s to get rid of this. And we've been trying ever since.
Wow. Can you say that all in Gaelic? I'm kidding here.
Well, I speak Scots, but not Gaelic. We have two indigenous languages, Gaelic and Scots.
What's this division of those countries? Ireland is independent, but not Northern Ireland. Wales is not independent, and so you got Scotland, you got Wales, and you got England. All right. So why is Ireland free and not the rest?
Well, most of Ireland is free because they fought for their independence. And they're regarded by the UN as a former colony.
They are?
Yeah. Because they had all the conditions, the starvation, the outmigration, the destruction, all the rest of it. So they had the same characteristics as many other
Northern
colonies.
Ireland? Why is Northern Ireland still folded into the UK?
The UK approach on decolonisation of its territories is quite often to partition them. And they did this with India, Pakistan, they did this with Cyprus, they did it with Palestine, and where are we today with that? And we had it with Ireland and Northern Ireland, Southern. So they do that, but they wanted a piece of Ireland to make sure that they could say that they controlled the British Isles.
Okay.
They wanted a little piece of Ireland, but they should let that we hope that will be reunified soon, as well as Scottish independence and Welsh independence. Wales was subsumed by force.
But do they like being in that union? I mean, the Welsh people?
Well, half of the Welsh people don't, but we have the same problem. We have a large population from England who don't vote for Scottish independence. Wales is right on the border with England as well. They have a large population from England that live there. So most of the people that vote against Welsh independence are people from England. It's a cultural emotion.
Wow. All right, Randy Critical Live on the Fly. Craig, would you introduce this woman here and Linda and formally, and she can chime in on this and her activism and why all this is important to her?
Yeah.
All right.
Linda Baird is a distinguished Egyptologist, in fact, in terms of profession, but she's a doughty campaigner for Scottish independence, and she's been talking to diplomats from around the world here this last few days, explaining to them the case for Scottish independence. And Linda comes from Musselburgh, just outside Edinburgh, and has a profound grasp of Scottish culture and history, and I think is a good example of how Scots feel about the need to reclaim our national identity. Is that fair, Linda?
Simply. Fair enough. I'm simply a grandmother wanting my country free for my grandchildren. That's what I stand for, Scottish independence.
Well, I would talk about John Stuart Mill, who was Scottish. John Stuart Mill, who was part of the British imperialism. How does someone like that get corrupted into being part of that? And what does that do? When you look at the Scottish Enlightenment, you had people like John Stuart Mill, you know.
Yeah, what I found in my research of colonialism is it's always a cooperative venture with native elites. It doesn't matter where it is. You'll find a native elite who will buy into that, and they will work for the colonizer.
I agree.
Whether that's an African tribe or Indian Raj, whatever.
It's international.
Yeah, and then you get what's called what we've got in Scotland. You move from direct rule from London. You move to what's called indirect rule. So you might have a local parliament set up with local people. So we have a parliament in Holyrood, but it's just indirect rule. It's what we would otherwise describe as a colonial administration. It uses it gets a limited budget from London. It pays it out to the usual people. So you have the bourgeoisie also buy into the colonialism. The bourgeoisie in post-colonial theory are a big part of the system. They run the institutions, and also people coming out from the colonial power. So all the best jobs in Scotland were always advertised in London. Yeah. So where do you think all our elites come from? They're either from the elites in the colonial schools in Scotland, or they come from the metropolitan capital, whether that's Paris, whether that's London, wherever it is. So that's where your elites come from, and they all buy into the system. They all have the culture of the colonizer, and they have the values of the colonizer, and the values are very important. What are the values of the elites here? Well, the British one nation state idea, the British Empire if it existed, the British monarchy, the British flag, the symbols, the celebrations, all these things are part of the system. But essentially, the values also include the crushing of the colonised.
Right.
The crushing of the colonised is the thing. So the Scots were crushed. And these people who assimilate into the culture of the colonizer buy into that idea, and they use defence mechanisms, going back to Freud's theory about the superego and everything. The values there are very important because they come into it. They use these values and they create defence mechanisms to refuse to accept the exploitation, the plunder, the deaths, the wars, all these things. They regard these in many cases as deserved, because remember also colonialism is about debasing the colonised, making them, and this also relates to internalised racism, where you see it in communities in America as well. Internalized racism is part of the system. So you get two forms of racism in colonialism. One is colonialism is racism. It's exploiting a people and a culture and subordinating them and marginalizing them. And then these people then internalize that racism and they feel it's deserved.
Yeah, you got domestic colonialism in this country as two that follow this show, Inez and Charles Barron, speaking truth to power. We'll talk about domestic colonialism, all right, which happens like in New York or California or anywhere else, Texas, and we had a long discussion. Craig Murray, look, I don't think that the Brits want to let go Scotland because they are in a desperate economic situation as it is. They've lost all of their colonies. They're losing their attempts to grab Russian territory and whatever spoils are there. So they're in pretty bad shape. They are going to go down fighting to keep Scotland within their realm. Craig?
I think that's undoubtedly true. And it's a practical thing, this appropriation of our resources. We have more oil and gas than Norway, for example.
No, are you serious?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
We have more oil and gas reserves than Norway. And we get nothing for it. The money all goes to London. Or the
BP?
And even with the gas physically goes to England, and even it comes from Scotland, goes on, it's all offloaded down in Bacton in Norfolk. All the taxation goes to London. Scotland gets nothing from taxation on oil and gas at all. And nowadays, of course, we have the switch to generation, and Scotland already produces, purely on renewable energy, Scotland already produces more than 100% of its own energy needs, purely on renewables. But that's all sent down to England as well. And again, we get nothing. We get no royalties. We get nothing for it at all. And the same is true of even resources you don't often think of, like water. In fact, huge new pipelines are being built to take more and more water down to England. And we get nothing. The brain drain of Scotland's population, who have to go down to London to find work because of the way that Scotland's been economically hollowed out. There just isn't the work for them in Scotland. So the use of the human resources as well, the exploitation of human resources continues. No, the British state is never willingly going to let Scotland go. They let us have a referendum in 2012, which we narrowly lost. At the time that referendum was called, independent support was standing at about 28%. So they thought that we would be humiliated and it would close the question forever. But in fact, on the day after a very crooked campaign, which met no international standards, with an unbelievably biased media and all kinds of institutional odds stacked against the Scottish people, we still got to 45% voting for independence.
Is that 2012? There's another one.
2012, yeah.
Wasn't there another one?
Sorry, 2014.
2014.
Right. Apologies. 2014, yeah. We still got to 45%, and that gave them a huge shock. So, and now, of course, the opinion polls all show a majority for Scottish independence, so there's no way they will never allow another vote. And Starmer has said, the Prime Minister has said, there will not be another vote for Scottish independence because they know we'd leave. And certainly it would be a massive blow to them. And it wouldn't just be a blow in terms of all the economic resources they would lose. They'd also lose the only place where they can station their nuclear weapons, because the only base for their nuclear submarines is in Scotland. On top of which, of course, the status of the United Kingdom, it's not by any means certain that the United Nations would accept England as the successor state of Scotland with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, for example. So this whole post-imperial status that they live on would be under threat. So we're going to have to achieve independence against the British state.
How are you going to do that? What's the strategy here? What measures can you take? And the second part of that question is, what precedent are you using right now to push your case?
Well, postcolonial theory tells you have to use multiple methods to do this. Up until now, we've depended on a referendum. The political elite, if you like, is locked into the idea that they have to go through Westminster, they have to go through London to get independence. What we've done in Liberation Scotland is create an organisation that has got many, many thousands of people as members, and we're petitioning the United Nations now. We're petitioning the United Nations to actually have listing as a colony, to be decolonised, and to use the UN mechanisms for self-determination, for decolonisation. There is also elections now coming up next May, where the political parties have now realised that this is a colonial situation. They're beginning to realise it. It's a colonial situation. You have to decolonise. So what they're going to do next May, it looks like there's going to be quite a big campaign now with multiple political parties who will campaign. If they get the seats next May, and as Craig says, it looks like the polls are in our favour, then they will declare independence. They could declare independence next year. And there is a plan now, even with the dominant National Party, with people in it, they want to declare independence next year, give 1 year negotiation, and have independence definitely in play by May 2027, with or without London's agreement.
Right. There's enough Scottish royalty or Scottish gentry or whatever who are willing to sell out. It's just like the William Wallace had to deal with those landowners within the country that collaborated with Longshanks, right?
Well, exactly right. That's what I said. Colonialism is always a cooperative venture with native elites. We've had the native elites telling us for 3 centuries how great Britain is. But all they've done is drag us into 200 wars, 100 that Ireland's avoided in the last 100 years. They drag us into wars all the time. They make us enemies of everybody. Yeah. Scots are neutral on all these wars. All these London wars.
Well, they got dragged into World War I,
Yeah, exactly. That was not a British war necessarily. It was a European war.
Right.
Although it was a war. It was a war of the great powers, and then of course after the war they all carved up different territories, including the Middle East.
Scotland doesn't have any colonies, right? Itself.
Oh, no. Scotland was never a colonising country.
So this would be great inspiration for those countries that are still under direct or neo-colonialism.
This week we've been campaigning for decolonisation of New Caledonia and the Pacific, which is we're Old Caledonia. We're campaigning for New Caledonia to decolonise from France and French Polynesia and other territories. We want these to decolonise. We would support decolonisation. And we want to be a member state of the UN. So what we've also discovered here, not just this week but previously, is independence as being a UN member state. So what we've been saying to the Scottish Government, you should have representation here. You should have permanent representation at the UN in Manhattan. You should have an office there. You should have observer status, or you should have other. You should contribute to that forum because you want to be a member, and membership of the UN is independence.
Where's the Scottish National Party on this? Are they still? They're in charge. Sturgeon's gone, right?
Yeah, she's gone, but they have the same colonial mindset. They look to London to give them the liberation. They look to knock on Downing Street's door for the generosity of the colonial power to liberate them. That's not going to happen. We have to do this ourselves, which is through the people themselves and through the international agencies and through international law. That's what gives you independence.
Right. Well, we can't expect much help from King Charles. I guess he's in the same boat with his late mother.
we have another problem there. We have two crowns in the UK. We have a Scottish crown, which has never been on Charlie's head. We have an English crown, then the imperial state crown, which goes on his head. So what we're doing is we're trying to show allegiance to a foreign crown, which is not the Scottish crown. And the meaning of the Scottish...
What is the Scottish crown?
It's a crown. It's a crown. But the meaning is different. In Scotland,
it goes back to Mary, Queen of Scots?
It goes back before then as well. It goes back to Wallace, to Bruce. It goes back to the Pictish kingdom, actually, in the 800s, and the merger of the Gaels and the Picts. But we have a different approach because the crown in Scots means the community, it means the people. Sovereignty rests with the people, not with Parliament or a monarch. And the people, we have in our constitution, the claim of right as part of the treaty, is that we can remove a government that's tyrannical or whatever, and a monarch.
Craig, I mean, this is going to be a slow process, or how will it be, in the fast lane, getting this achieved? I mean, do you see, what kind of scenario do you envision that could actually, get this done?
It's going to need to be ultimately, I think, by an election victory or similar event, and then the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government declares independence. That's going to have to be the trigger.
And that could, now, wait a second. They just declare independence, and it will not be recognized by London.
Exactly. London will try not to recognise it. If by then, should we have succeeded in getting Scotland listed at the UN as a non-self-governing territory, then London doesn't have the option not to recognise it. That takes away that option in international law. But in any event, it would eventually come down to a vote at the United Nations, at the General Assembly. But the key factor which all nations look at in determining whether to recognise a state, which is, if you like, the necessary but not sufficient condition of recognition, is control of territory. They look to see, does the government which is claiming independence actually control the territory which it's saying is independent? So you have at that stage you have to be prepared to assert physical control. You have to be prepared to take to the streets, and if the British government sends in the tanks, you have to be prepared to stand in the streets and face the tanks.
Are they prepared?
I think Scots people are prepared. Scots people.
Linda's like shaking her head.
We've not had much opportunity to be prepared. Our Scottish government's been in control since 2007. They could have taken
So they've been colluding with the powers that be.
I believe so.
Yeah, well, post-colonial theory tells you that what the dominant national party does is it lacks the courage at the decisive moment. We have elected 6 majorities of nationalist parliamentarians, 3 in Scotland and 3 at the Westminster UK government. 6 majorities we've had, and the national parties refuse still to declare independence. So, but the post-colonial theory tells us that that's what happens. They suffer a form of petrifaction. They lack motivation for independence. They become part of the colonial racket. They pile up their pensions. They build up their pensions rather, and they become part of the system. So this is understood as part of the problem. But what the membership of the National Party is trying to do now is that there's various groups within it. A large movement is trying to change the leadership's approach to to move it towards liberation, declaring independence, going through the UN, doing all these things that we need to do to move things on, because all the National Party has done up to now is delay independence, and that's what creates the conditions for potential conflict that we have to avoid. Right. We just have to move ahead, and this requires courage at the decisive moment instead of petrifaction.
Right. You need a John Brown. Reggie, you want to kick in?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. And you mentioned about the government of Scotland is not ready, but are the people ready for independence?
Yeah, I think the people are increasingly ready. As Craig says, all the polling is suggesting there's now majorities in favour of independence. We're still having a job to explain to people what independence means. It means liberation from oppression. It means decolonisation. It means self-recovery of culture. Your culture. We no longer have to appoint all our best people from another country, as we've had to do in the last 100 years or more. So we have a meritocratic elite that doesn't represent us. And
I know that there was some controversy that I saw on online on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, well, X, whatever the hell you want to call it these days, about the resurrecting the Scottish language. And I know that there was people that were for it and there was people that were against it. I mean, what is the sentiment now about that?
Well, post-colonial theory tells you the first thing an oppressed people look for when they liberate is their language. Their languages. Mm-hmm. We have the two indigenous languages. We have Gaelic language and we have Scots language. Right. We have English language is the only language that's taught to us in the schools, but that's not the language of our culture. And this is very important because language in decolonisation is a central feature, because language is what gives us our identity. Right. And that's what gives us diversity of nations around the world, of peoples, is language. That's why in the UN definition of a non-self-governing territory, one of the key parts of that is an ethnic community group, a people culturally distinct and linguistically distinct, and that is extremely important. And that's why the colonial power never teaches you your language. It never teaches indigenous languages. It just wants to control you through the other language, and that's what creates the division in society. That's what obscures the oppression, but that's assimilation. So the two options in colonialism is either liberation, independence, self-recovery, that's the remedy, the only remedy, or the other option is assimilation. What happens with assimilation is you become another culture, another identity. Your nation perishes. Your people perishes. Scotland is in the process of perishing. Any nation that's still colonised is in the process of perishing, as well as losing all its assets and everything, losing its identity, losing its culture. That's the only option. So Scots have that option, either liberation or assimilation.
Now, I know that, and I know I'm going into some sensitive territory what I'm about to say, and I'm not comparing the suffering and the murdering of people of Palestine, and I fully am aware of that. But would you consider something like that as a form of genocide, at least in the cultural sense?
Absolutely. I attended, Craig and I and others attended the Human Rights Council in Geneva recently, where there was discussions with the Palestine group and the rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, on genocide in Palestine. And what we witnessed was also the same things had happened to places like Ireland and Scotland in centuries gone by, but colonialism had continued. So we had erasure of the people, we had the genocide, the moving out, the displacement, the settler occupation, we had all that. We had the exploitation, the territorial annexation. All these features are the same in Scotland. We have a false state ruling the roost in Scotland. We have the England as UK, rebranded as UK. It's still its own parliament, and they simply annexed Scotland and took the territory, which leads to the legal concept. We have a challenge coming up on that, on what's called territorial alienation. So we don't have just cultural alienation and economic exploitation. We have territorial alienation. That land is owned by the people, and it links back to our crown, the community of the realm. That is locks into the Scottish territory has been annexed, exploited. So we're looking at reparations as well as any other territory. We've had billions. Like I said, we have a colonial gap, a balance sheet deficit of $200 billion every year. $200 billion is taken out one way or another out of the Scottish economy, away from the Scottish people every year.
I mean, is the general population of Scotland aware of that?
Increasingly so. Increasingly so, but we are against 100% anti-colonial media.
Yeah. I think it's a great precedent that what you're trying to do here. It just does. It's not just about Scotland. It's about other places.
Oh yeah, there's many.
Africa.
Yeah,
and around the world.
Even within France, we know that there's all these colonies that we've been helping to promote decolonization.
We need to talk about that New Caledonia.
New Caledonia.
Because I brought up Henry Rochefort, who was sent to he was transported. During the Paris Commune to New Caledonia. Mm-hmm. And New Caledonia was, it's off the coast of Australia, was a penal colony.
Yes.
And the French run that still. They just sent 7,000 troops there. Tell us about that.
Yeah, they still run it. And they do all the atomic explosions off French Polynesia. They do all the hundreds of testing that's been going on there. So they do all that, and they control it. There's only a couple of 100,000 people in New Caledonia. The Kanaks are the indigenous people, and they've been made under 50% of the population. And that's a colonial procedure where you can make the indigenous
genocide?
people... Yeah, well, it's cultural and also settler
cleansing?
Occupation, but preventing births. Preventing births is one of the things that's one of the things that Francesca Albanese talked about Palestine. If you prevent births, that's a form of genocide. You're killing off a people. You're not giving them housing. You're not giving them enough money to bring up a family. You're not giving them economic growth. We have the same problems in Scotland now.
What are the French doing there?
Well, it's just nickel is the big product they take out of there. Tourism is another one, but they're just filling it full of Europeans, French settlers. What Home Rule does as well, as post-colonial theories write about, is it provides the colonial power the opportunity just to send thousands of civil servants into a colony, whether it's Martinique, whether it's Reunion, wherever. They just send, in Edinburgh as well, we've had the same. We've had thousands of civil servants sent from London into big new offices in Edinburgh to control the Scots.
We have had over 1 million integration come over the border from England to Scotland.
That's the last 25 years, yeah.
So they came there to
they
jump up the numbers.
Yeah, they also have the buying power to buy the best properties. So, and there's no controls over what they can buy. They can buy up all the houses that they want.
It's like the West Bank.
Yeah, exactly. So it's settler occupation, which is one of the 3 or 4 key features of colonialism.
We have no control of our own borders or our land, or who can buy houses or property or land in our country.
This is great because you are linking what's happening in Scotland to what's happening in other places in Palestine, New Caledonia, and so it would be great if
the idea
coalesced.
Is what the British state want to do, the English state, is to make sure that the vote for independence goes under half, under 50%. It means in referendum and elections you would have trouble getting a majority. So they're like the Kanak people in New Caledonia. They're about 48% of the people now, 44%.
Went from 100% down to 48%.
Yeah, they've been made a minority.
Wow.
And then, so it means the French state can say to the UN, well, democratic results suggest they're not a majority.
Where is the UN on New Caledonia?
Well, the UN, I think one of the criticisms of the UN this week by a lot of people, a lot of member states as well as non-member states, is they've taken the foot off the accelerator on decolonisation. They've become part of the system. So a lot of former colonies, now independent states, have pulled the ladder up behind them. They've got their privileges. They've got their independent status.
I like that metaphor.
They've kicked out the colonizers.
You Scots come up with the greatest metaphors.
They've pulled the ladder up behind them. So all us other colonies are waiting.
Can I use that?
Yeah. So the big call.
Pull the ladder up.
The big call is more colonies need recognised.
At least you ask permission for it, so you won't be accused of being a colonizer.
I don't want to be a plagiarist like Joe Biden. Where was Neil Canuck from? Was he Scottish?
No,
Welsh. All right. He welched on the Welsh, right? Basically. He was not such a great guy. We had this great picture of Neil Canuck as a man of the people. It turns out, I don't think he was. Was he?
Well, the politicians certainly still don't understand decolonisation. I think that's a big worry because we've been told in Scotland even by the political and also intellectuals. Remember, the intellectuals in Scottish universities are all culturally Anglophone. What I found in my research was that 90% of the academics in Scottish universities weren't Scottish. The other 10%.
No, is that true?
Yeah,
Wow.
only 10% were Scottish.
All right, so let's get back. What did I just hear? I'll ask you, Linda.
It's called Scotland the Brave is the official title. It was called We Saw the Tattoo Hookers Coming Through the Broomielaw. Yeah. It was all about, in October, all the schools in Scotland got 2 weeks holiday, and it was to help the farmers bring in the produce of Scottish potatoes. And that's why we had the 2 weeks holiday from school. We used to all go and pick the potatoes from the potato field and put them in barrels so they could be sold.
That's not the national anthem.
No, it's not.
It's a lament.
It's a lament.
It's
kind of a dirge.
What's unusual about it is
A requiem.
it's a lament. It's about an assertion that you want to be a liberated nation. But it's not a national anthem as we would normally expect it, which is about celebrating liberation. We're not liberated yet. So we're probably going to need a new national anthem that celebrates liberation, not an aspiration to be a nation.
All right. Now, Craig, you mentioned, and we didn't follow up on Hugh Kerr. Where is Hugh Kerr these days on all of this? Because I met him in having plav at your house with some wonderful Italian wine, if you recall. And he was a former MEP, right?
It was Amarone. There were 4 of us, and we drank 7 bottles. I do recall
that was more expensive than your book, by the way, that bottle. I remember you saying, Randy has brought some very expensive wine.
But I'm also glad you came back to me, because you had the song earlier about the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and I haven't yet had a chance to tell everyone it was my ancestor who won it. It was Andrew Murray was the general.
No, are you serious?
Serious, yeah. Ancestor of mine. And Andrew Murray
Nice.
won the Battle of Stirling. I've been fighting the English for a long time.
Right.
Many generations, and it was interesting because William Wallace, of course, not without justice, rightly gets the credit for winning the Battle of Stirling Bridge. That was Wallace's greatest battle, but actually he wasn't the general. His boss was Andrew Murray, was the general, but Andrew died in the battle. Wallace survived. That's why people remember William Wallace and don't remember Andrew Murray. So there you are. I think a quick name drop for an ancestor of mine who deserves it. No, I think, and another thing to pick up on, you mentioned John Stuart Mill, a great philosopher, and that's a great example, if you like, of the colonial process, because John Stuart Mill, Mill is not a Scottish surname. His father was born James Milne, Milne, which is a Scottish surname. His father moved to London and anglicised the name to Mill to sound English in order to get on in society. And they came from the town of Montrose, and Montrose had been a very important port in Scotland. And
aren't you from Montrose?
I've spent a lot of time there, but I'm not
Dundee. All right.
Yeah. But Alexander Burns was from Montrose, who I wrote a book about that you know. But the town of Montrose, when Scotland was an independent country, had a massive trade with the Baltic towns, and a lot of Scotland's trade was oriented, as you would expect geographically, to the Baltic and to the Nordic countries. And 500 merchant ships used to leave Montrose annually when the Baltic ice broke, because during the winter you couldn't trade with the Baltic. But after the Treaty of Union and after various navigation acts of the British government were applied, Montrose lost its trade, and the city, the town, lost its raison d'etre, really became very poor. That's why it was a major focus of rebellion. The people of Montrose took part in 3 different rebellions against the Union during the 18th century, and it's why John Stuart Mill and his family had to leave and go down and live in England and change their name and anglicise in order to make a living. So I just give that as one interesting story to give about the colonial process.
Interesting character, Craig, because he's the one that supplied the writer on the French Revolution, Thomas Carlyle, all of his reference books on the French Revolution to Thomas Carlyle, and he wrote this 3-part series on the French Revolution, and he got halfway through and he gave it to John Stuart Mill, and his maid threw it in for kindling.
Yeah, that's true. John Stuart Mill. Well, I think Carlyle was actually staying in the house at the time. John Stuart Mill was reviewing Carlyle's manuscript, and John Stuart Mill's maid used the manuscript to light the fires, which was
well,
unfortunate.
I don't know. It's just desserts here.
But we were discussing free speech earlier, and I must say, I think, for me, John Stuart Mill is still a truly great philosopher.
I do too.
Was absolutely part of the foundation of what used to be Western political thinking and what used to be, at least the theory of Western democracy. And there's so much that he wrote, particularly on free speech, which we are abandoning now. His defense of personal liberty in his book on liberty is tremendous, and his arguments on the limitations of free speech, I think, are absolutely correct. And
he was a utilitarian.
Right? He was he was a kind of modified utilitarian. His father was the great utilitarian.
Bentham was
but Bentham, then James Mill, then John Stuart Mill was kind of the intellectual progression. And John Stuart Mill broke from strict utilitarianism in some ways in his philosophy. But on free speech, Mill was almost a free speech absolutist, but he said context is very important. And the example he gave was, he said, it should be perfectly legal to argue that corn dealers are thieves who profit and starve the poor. He said that should be perfectly legal to argue. But if you shout it outside a corn dealer's house at midnight to a mob armed with pitchforks and torches, that's a different context, and it's not legal to, essentially this idea of incitement.
Yelling fire in a theater when there's no fire.
Exactly. That was Wendell, what's his name? Who
Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Yeah, who took that on. And I think that's correct. And I think, sadly, we are now abandoning these notions, and with these much wider ideas of so-called harmful speech, which can be harmful in a long-term or progressive sense. And that becomes very dangerous, because once you get into that, you're abandoning the notion of free speech at all.
Alf, what do you think? How does that affect Scotland, these repressive laws that are being passed by UK Parliament and signed by the most unpopular Prime Minister since, I don't know who was as unpopular, maybe Tony Blair at his nadir, but...
Yeah, well, we have a double layer of oppressive laws, because what you have in colonialism is you have laws coming from the metropolitan capital, London in our case, but where you've got a complicit national party that's running a colonial administration and delaying independence, it introduces its own levels of mystification laws to make it look busy. But they end up oppressing the people. So we've had a whole range of really terrible laws imposed on Scotland, a lot of them very unnecessary, but essentially they hinder free speech, they hinder the ability to protest in public, they hinder all these aspects of what you would call an open democratic society. And so this is a real problem. Also, we have a society where the government redact pretty much everything. They never release information that they don't want in the public domain. We have the additional problem in Scotland is we have a 99% press from London. So we have a media that's anti-Scottish independence as well. So we have this double layer of colonial oppression, if you like, from Westminster and from Edinburgh. And this is what we're trying to get out. And that's the reality of indirect rule as well. It's a real problem. And I mentioned earlier that Scotland has the highest prison population in Western Europe.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have
25% of the world's prison population.
You have a very big population. England has
the only people that are able to get out of prison in this country is if they rioted on January 6, 2000.
Apparently.
Yeah. But the other thing is England has a very high problem. And I think if you link it back, it's an Anglo-Saxon problem. It's about the way the judges, the judiciary, the system looks at minorities. And remember, in the UK, Scots are a minority. Scots are a minority people in the UK.
Are they looked down upon by British citizens?
Not
as if they're Übermenschen?
Well, the subordinate in a sense, it's also internalised racism, appropriate racial oppression, makes the Scots themselves see themselves as subordinate.
Aren't they ethnically the same or not?
No.
Culturally and ethically, they're not the same?
No, they're not the same. Scots are an ethnic and cultural group, linguistic, different society, different beliefs.
I want them to hear that. Right.
So you have this, and where you have this ethnic division of labour, ethnic and cultural division of labour, and you have the people in the higher levels of society ruling over the minorities, then you have this potential for institutionalised oppression. And in colonialism, oppression is institutionalized because all your institutions are colonial in nature and in terms of values.
And just to follow up what Randy was asking, I wanted to ask this question. How many people in Scotland identify as Scottish?
Yeah, well, if we link that to linguistically, out of the 5.6 million, over 2 million people say they speak Scots.
Okay.
And about 50,000 to 100,000 speak Gaelic. Okay. So it's less than half the people think themselves as really a Scottish identity. Many, remember that half, I would say increasingly, but probably towards a third of the population have an identity that's not Scottish. The other half have a Scottish identity, or just under half, but the balance are people who are confused. And remember, in colonial societies, people's identity is confused. Because they're made to want to be something else. So the idea of British imperialism was to make people think they were British, or rather English. And they did this in India, in Kenya, in Ireland, in Scotland, in every colony. And the teaching of English studies, English literature, English superiority in these senses makes people that want to assimilate, they want to crave dependence. They need that. So this is a real problem. So yeah, I would say about half the people in Scotland have no doubt about their Scottish identity. But that's a challenge again for democracy, because if you want independence, you need more than half.
All right, we have just 3 minutes left. But go ahead. I got to ask you a question, Craig.
Can I just add to that?
Yes.
Well, just a second, because there's a bit of information I literally just saw last week, because we had a census last year. And the census, it happens every 10 years. In the last census, one of the questions you're asked is, what is your national identity? And 70% of people said their national identity was Scots. Mm-hmm. And that's actually up 15% higher than the last census 10 years ago. 10 years ago, amazing. Only 55% of people said they identified as Scots. Whereas in this census, it had gone up to 70%. So that's a major cultural change and a major recovery of identity, which is very important.
All right, I have one more question. We only have 2 more minutes. And this is to you, anyone who wants to answer this. Now, my dear friend George Galloway has been an opponent of independence for Scotland. Now, he's a brilliant person, does great work, but wasn't he hoisted on his own petard when he was, sequestered at Gatwick and taken into a room and grilled?
Well, I think it's very important to say that
wasn't he hoisted on his own petard?
George has changed his mind. He stated recently that
he has a change of heart.
He's had a change of heart,
and this did it.
No, he stated before this happened to him. He said that the authoritarian nature of the British state had made him change his mind about.
Really? When did that happen?
About 2 months ago, he said.
All right, I missed that because he really is a jewel of the UK. He's like such a great thinker, and he's very influential. But for that to happen to him, what does that foretell? Well, what does that augur?
He's a courageous man. What I would say...
We have 1 minute left.
We had the professor of law from Edinburgh University give a legal opinion at the UN on Scottish independence, and for 59 years he believed in the Union. In the last year he's convinced now the Union never happened. It was never implemented. Scotland was annexed. England's Parliament continued. England as UK was rebranded. That's the reality. Scotland was annexed.
I don't want to say anything about it. I love George Galloway. He's been on this show many times. He's a very courageous.
He's a courageous Scotsman. He was courageous.
And I'm glad he's in your corner right now, because you couldn't have.
We need people who will fight for Scotland.
We need. He
people.
And Craig Murray are double barrel shotgun.
Absolutely. Ambassador Murray is our ambassador here at the UN.
Imagine if George and Craig were in the Parliament together.
Dundee has a great history. There's this great song with General Grant at the Taybridge Bar by a Dundee lyric. If you can ever get that song, General Grant visits the Taybridge Bar. That's
General Grant, Ulysses S. Grant?
Yeah, he visited Dundee in the Taybridge Bar, and he was celebrated.
Was he drinking champagne or?
He was in a bar, so he was drinking something.
He's got to be. He wasn't drinking scotch, huh?
I think it would probably be scotch, yeah.
Or martinis. I know that Craig is fond of martinis. All right, that's an inside joke. All right, I want to thank you, Al. I want to thank you, Linda Beard. And you're going to stick around, Craig, all right? You got to help me with the rest of this show because I'm getting a little lightheaded here right now. All right, we're going to play.
You mean emotional? That's what you was emotional over the announcement of
a great
change of heart.
I'm going to send this show to you, and you guys got to publicize it.
Absolutely. Well, I think people here will love to see Scotland independence. Linda and I are going around the States. We're meeting Scottish diaspora peoples, and we're going to speak about this for the next couple of weeks.
I'd love to visit you, but you bail me out if I get pinched.
Absolutely, yep.
At the Edinburgh airport. All right, we're going to take a quick break and talk about domestic